Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here all the way from England to tell you a little bit about what our experience is in the world of aviation, managing this difficult subject called fatigue. Everyone seems to have an opinion on it, and it's something that we all feel. And so I'd like to just set up by just asking people to raise their hands if they got 6 hours sleep or more last night. Did you? Good. And both hands if you got 3 hours sleep or more. Good. Now we've got your surrender. We'll continue with the presentation. The really antidote to fatigue is sleep, and we can see why a little bit later. But what your body is telling you when you're fatigued is please go to sleep. We're interested in sleep, not because we just feel tired, but because you start making mistakes. A secretary might just not put a stamp on the letter or misaddress something, but an airline pilot, as we know, can actually kill someone at the end of the 13-hour journey. So it's important to be able to measure it and then to be able to predict what a roster is going to be like before it's flown. I've just had a client call me earlier this year where one of his pilots, well, two of his pilots, got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, reported for work at 6, worked all day until 10 o'clock at night, went home, so they'd been asleep at 1. They got up at 4, climbed into their aircraft at 6, flew 5 sectors, and planned, mind you, to be at, back at the airport at 3:17 in the morning. Right? Now at 1 o'clock they hit the mountain, and it took me about 10 minutes to turn on my computer, fire up my model, and actually work out that they were asleep. I could do that in less than 10 minutes. So I'm pleased that the controller in that company now understands that and now has a tool that this won't happen again, because he will not do that again. So what I'm going to do today is to talk about the need. Well, happily, the two previous speakers have covered quite a bit of that for me, so you'll be pleased you can get out early, and I won't cover that. Then we'll look at some of the approaches to satisfy that need and looking at some of the benefits. And then I've been asked to cover the model that has been alluded to. There is a so-called NASA database. Well, actually, NASA's contribution actually is relatively small, but it was the first major approach to creating a measurable model that we were involved in to create a huge database that is a sum of a lot of pilot experiences, so we know when pilots sleep as they move across the world. So that's what we like to see. Happy crew, all alert and all nice. Unhappily, the reality is a little bit different. And that's what you tend to get. I did a survey on behalf of IFALPA recently in the last month, and you only got a 2% return. There's about 100,000 pilots in the world, and we got about 2,000 responding. And to one of the questions we asked, which was, how often, or have you in the last month looked across when you've woken up in the cockpit and seen your co-pilot asleep? And more than 50% said yes. So that's a small sample, but there's over 1,000 pilots who are doing this seemingly on a regular basis. So we have a problem. Anyway, that's what fatigue is. Don't confuse it with sleepiness. Fatigue really is the impaired performance of the human as time goes on and he needs to sleep. So I'll skip over quite a bit of this because it's already been covered, but I would point out, though, that there's some barriers here because aircrew tend not to report it. They're scared of actually some action against them. And similarly, they can be hidden. This is quite common, that people will actually take on more work and be fatigued because they get 7 days off afterwards. One airline I was giving some advice to run his rosters through my model before he got the regulatory approval. He told me quite happily that he was going to see his parents that weekend, or the following weekend, in a different continent, a long way away. But before that, he had to go to the other side of the world to fly around there, get back, and then jump in a plane and go down to see them. So when I inquired exactly what he was doing, he'd used his seniority to fly 36 hours straight, then back home, and then he'd fly to this extra continent. And I asked him what his job title was. Safety manager, he said. So that's what people are doing. They believe it's not me. It's like being a drunk driver. You know, you think it's other people's problem, it's not me. So fatigue issues can be hidden because of that, and also, of course, the payment systems. There was an airline that came to us with fatigue crew going from Los Angeles to New York, and the younger pilots wanted 2 nights in New York. The elder pilots wanted to go back home. So we did the analysis and found it's probably better to go straight home because your body clock has moved up to Albuquerque and it goes back again. And so that was fine, except no one complained about a horrendous fatigue coming into Los Angeles. You know, I have no idea why, but there was some good reason why they didn't want to complain about it. We've covered all that, so I won't bother with it. So one of the solutions actually is clearly having a fatigue risk management system, because then you're managing the risk of fatigue. And it has some benefits, and it's one of these systems that actually everyone wins. Because everyone, you're able to get the regulatory compliance, safety wins, and also you get the business improvement from doing it. Now, everything starts with the CEO, because he has to give some money out so that someone can actually start it off and find out how to do it. So this is what he's really concerned about really. He wants some hard evidence that he's actually going to get a return on his investment. And unless you can prove that, it's a bit hard getting money out of this guy. So it really can be represented as these things. These are the benefits that he can see and what he's interested in. So really the need comes down to the regulatory compliance. So as was pointed out the last speakers, ICAO have some very good guidelines that are now set out in terms of what the science is behind fatigue and how we can manage it. The management process is like any management process, to be frank. You can apply that management process to any form of management. I used to use something very similar for very large IT projects, and it's pretty classical. They use it for the safety management systems. If you have a safety management system in place, then you can just use fatigue as another risk and put it in the SMS. It's exactly the same process. Of course, EASA requirements and your local NAA will also have their requirements. But broadly, you know, you've got to actually make sure that you comply with that. Of course, you want to increase safety. Now, how safe is safe? We can have a separate debate about that. But I also say you can actually do everything if you actually, you can improve your business if in fact you do an FRMS, and everyone benefits there. And of course the important thing that we shouldn't forget is the aircrew contentment, because though the poor guys actually got to do it. In my business turnaround and post-acquisition merger experience, it became very clear to me that you have to look after your employees. People say to me, what should you do? Look after your employees or your shareholders? And the usual answer is shareholders. Actually, it's employees. If you look after your employees, they look after the customer. If the customer's happy, then the shareholder's happy. So really, what you can do is simply follow the guidelines that are in this document. You can download it from the ICAO and the IATA and the AFALPA website, and it's also there's a link on our website too, if you're interested in that. So here's some of the approaches to implementing it. And so you can just go straight for regulatory compliance. So it's the usual management tool. You have to do your gap analysis, identify all the hazards, get your documentation right, and educate, collect your data, and then let the committee that's overseeing this look at the data, apply the scientific principles, and then take their action. So it's relatively straightforward. Now then the business improvement comes in because you're collecting data. And when you're collecting data, then you can make management decisions. You can't make management decisions without data. Otherwise it's just, you know, emotional decision making really. And because you've got that, therefore you've got some productivity. You can stop doing things you shouldn't be doing, and you can highlight areas where you can get an advantage, and therefore you can get a return on investment. So that's what ICAO demonstrates as their model. So it's a simple, straightforward model that eventually takes you to the final area where you're going into a continuous improvement program. And as I say, really it's all about managing the fatigue risk. But really, if you get someone who can advise you on the subject matter, anyone who is involved in the management process should be able to do that. So, looking at the subject matter expertise, I'll give you a very, very top-level view in terms of what fatigue really is all about. It is rather complex, and you can see there it's not really one dimension at all. And as we mentioned before, there is no biochemical markers for fatigue, but in fact you can measure it, and we have measured it, and we can give people a number to reflect how fatigued people are. I'll show you that later. So the problem is that people are people. They're individuals. You can't put a group of people together and expect them to be the same. We have owls, we have larks, we have people who seemingly are intelligent and only exist, like Margaret Thatcher did, on 3 hours sleep a night. And then we have people who are also intelligent who actually need 10 hours sleep a night, like Einstein. So sleepiness and the amount of sleep doesn't really link with intelligence. So these are the two main drivers of fatigue. The first is the time since last sleep. And you can see from the graph there, unhappily my little, oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. This is the alertness level here against time. You can see you wake up, and you've all recognized the groggy feeling when you wake up. That's sleep inertia, and eventually you come to about 20 minutes or so after you've woken up after a night's sleep. And then it dribbles downhill in an exponential way for the rest of the day until you have a sleep again. And the second driver is the circadian rhythm, which has been mentioned before. So combining the effect, what you have is during the day, you have something that keeps you alert. The time since last sleep is going down, but the circadian rhythm is pushing you up. So it's broadly flat for the amount of time that we recognize as office hours. But at night, in fact, it drives everyone to sleep because we're designed to sleep at night. So fatigue actually is manageable as long as you get a good night's sleep at night. It doesn't really work for the airline industry, though. Anyway, this is the sort of things that happens when your alertness falls, and all these things we sort of heard about in the Colgan-Dash problem. And that really was driven, as we heard, by the fact that the airline didn't pay good wages, and people actually commuted from a long, long distance and actually slept in a chair in the restroom, which wasn't really a restroom. So all that lot will drive you to microsleeps. And microsleeps really aren't good news at all. So looking at how this translates into aviation, so these are the risk factors that create fatigue in the aviation industry. The extended duty hours we've heard all about, reduced stress we've heard all about, business jets particularly. You know, take a client to Hong Kong, he sleeps all the way, he has a 2-hour meeting, jumps in and asks the pilot to fly him back. Very long commuting times in the case of Colgan-Dash. In fact, we've just done a study with an airline whose pilots are living in a different continent, and what they're doing is flying into the hub and then compressing all their duties so they can get back home and have the 7 days off. And in doing that, they're missing out some of the important sleeps before the overnight duties. And that's really quite critical to handle overnight duties. Overnight duties are fatiguing. End of message. We're not designed to be flying overnight, so you've got to sleep beforehand and get as much sleep in as you can to get this sleep, the time since last sleep, back up and you know, allow you to get through the night. So split duties is another one, standby and so on and so forth. High workload and multiple legs. So will actually prescriptive flight times actually solve the problem? Well, not really. They collect the illusion of safe and unsafe. And we've just done a study for another country where the National Airline Council asked us to run the whole regulations through our model. And it was very easy to show that the flight time limitations actually allowed some pretty dangerous rosters, but forbade some rosters actually were no more fatiguing than others. So it doesn't mean that they're being legal, doesn't mean to say that it's safe. So here's a couple of people who have already put in a management system, and EasyJet actually are the best in the world. I have no doubt about that. It's my personal opinion, and other people might differ, but they're welcome to their opinion. But they certainly are the best in the world. They started the FRMS because their business model is all about taking businessmen into Europe for the start of the working day and then returning late at night. So the businessmen have had their day, but the poor pilot has to get up early in the morning and then come back late at night. So if he's in bed at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock and has to get up at 4, he's not going to get much sleep. So essentially, EasyJet were working outside the CAP 371 regulations. And so they had to work with the CAA in Gatwick to come up with a management process and a shift system that would allow them to manage the levels of fatigue. And they're doing it exceptionally well. They use both objective and subjective data, and they built up a very, very good relationship with their crew. Not great all the time, but it's a darn sight better than most. And so they're able to say, collect the data and provide the management oversight. Air New Zealand started from a completely different point of view, because wherever you go from New Zealand, it's a long way. And so they knew that they had to do something because all the pilots were complaining. And they did something really quite good, that they got an agreement with all the stakeholders that they would collect the data and they would act on the data. So if the data showed that a particular flight to Hong Kong was fatiguing and you need another night, then there was no debate about it. The airline had to provide that overnight. However, if the data showed that actually it wasn't fatiguing, then the air crew had to then discuss, what was fatiguing and look at lifestyle, look at other things to see if it was actually, something that they were doing, bearing in mind that they had a duty to pitch up for work, fit for duty. And of course, the hotels came into it. Noisy hotels is a problem and all sorts of things. But for a long time, we worked with Air New Zealand, and their data forms a good part of our model. And we continue to work with them. I'm just about to bring out a cabin crew version, and there'll be a maintenance version a little bit later. But of course, they now have an annual meeting where they take external scientific staff. They rotate it. Our mathematician that created our model that we work with has been the only, I think, constant in that committee, because there's no one better in the world who knows both about fatigue and mathematics and the airline industry. And so they have an independent review every year and decide how they're going to change, how they're going to manage better for the following year. So here's some of the benefits. As I say, EasyJet gave me these benefits. I haven't modified them at all. And they use our model to assess where their risks are and to assess and forecast the fatigue in all of their rosters. Interestingly, they've improved their insurance cost quite significantly. They were able to prove to their insurer that they can identify the fatigue risk, they can measure it, and therefore they can manage it. And so their insurance premiums came down by about £2 million a year, which is quite significant. They have 5 people working in FRMS. A low-cost carrier with 5 people on overhead means that they're making money out of it. They wouldn't normally do that. Air New Zealand, much the same. As I say, they've created this multi-party group, involved the unions absolutely extensively, and they've got the external review body. And so they use our model too. That's one of their fatigue report forms that they've developed to collect the necessary data. They've now got that, I think, on the flight deck, so they don't have to fill in bits of paper. So why consider it? Well, you need to increase your business performance. You need to obviously reduce the fatigue-related incidents, and then also discover these hidden things that no one talks about. Of course, then your operational excellence leads to the revenue improvement, so everyone's happy. So managing really starts off with collecting data. And once you've got your data, then you can make decisions. When people say to me, oh, it's fatiguing, you don't know what you're talking about, I say, well, I've got this huge database we've collected over 30 years. If you've got a better database, come along and show it to me, and I'll be very happy to discuss it with you. Otherwise, this is the best database in the world. So it's all about, collecting the data and then creating the leading indicators so you can see what's going to happen in the future and therefore avoid putting yourself into a fatiguing situation. Aircrew, obviously, there's a huge lot of benefits to them. Safety manager too, he's got another tick in the box, and the CEO is delighted because he's got less often on-the-job incidents, he's got more flexibility and productivity, and lower operational risk and lower insurance costs. So there's a return on the CEO's investment, which is very, very, very significant. Looking at modelling, this is the one what I've really been asked to do. The first was a preamble. Where models can help and the kind of models to use. As I said, we've looked at the drivers of alertness, time since last sleep, circadian rhythm. Then the third one is the workload of any occupation. Trained drivers are different to pilots, are different to office workers, are different to scientists, teachers. So for God's sake, if you're going to use a model one that's tuned to a pilot and apply that to the pilot. Don't have one for the rail and don't have one for truck drivers because they are plain wrong. This is how we measure fatigue. We wire people up like this. We also measure their circadian rhythm because that goes with body temperature as well. So we invite the pilots to choose their probe, but they're not allowed to choose where we put it. Passengers used to get a little bit wary when the pilot used to come in with all this wire under his cap and wires hanging out of his trousers. So we try and not do that quite so much these days. But we still use some very high-tech gear to collect the data. And of course, that's a sleep diary that we use for the subjective fatigue. And of course, occasionally we use headsets and whole harnesses to measure the biology and the brain activity of the pilots. That's your Acti watch, which is an accelerometer, so we know when you're waving your hands around, you're probably awake. If you're not, then you're probably asleep. So we can then link the objective data from there and there with what you say that you do. Now, then you can do that, which is quite expensive, or you can just use a model, that is, use somebody else's knowledge and experience. They put the cost in to collect the data, so why don't use that? A lot easier. So I'll introduce our model, which is designed specifically for commercial aircrew. And this is how it started. Years ago, Mick Spencer ran a project on behalf of the Ministry of Defence, what was the Institute of Aviation Medicine. It went through a change of name to Defence Evaluation Research Agency on behalf of the Ministry of Defence in the UK, and finally it's called Kinetic because it was sold off in 2001 and privatised. So at that time there was going to be a conflict in Europe that was going to last about 6-9 days. So the MOD wanted to know what would happen if the RAF flew 6 or 9 days without rest, without stopping. So we had a look around the world and found out that no one knew. So we had to start from scratch, built a sleep lab, did some lab tests, and we created the first model that we now call the kinetic alertness model. So that describes how people get tired. And that was the model that was used in the first NASA experiment way back in the early 90s when Air New Zealand approached NASA to see if they could help in their fatigue problem. So we got involved and to say, started there with aligning the model to the airline industry. The CAA then were funding the Institute of Aviation Medicine, about 10% of our costs, and so they understood what was going on, and they asked us, in fact, if we could actually modify it and use it in the airline industry. So they funded a whole lot of tests and studies for us, and we created a safe prototype in the early 2000s and sent that around the world to quite a lot of airlines to see if it was used to anyone, and people are still using it today. Since then, we've developed the model further, and I tried to get my bosses at Kinetic to commercialize it some years ago, and I just couldn't do it. It was just so far down the level of importance that it just wasn't done. So myself and Dr. Barbara Stone and Mick Spencer, we spun out, and I went back to Kinetic and asked them if they would give me the license to use the IP, which they did, and they did that in July 2011. And then we set to straight away and rebuilt the software because it was lab-based software that failed every 2 minutes. So it's now built to commercial quality standards. It's on the web, and so anyone can log into it and start using it straight away. It'll upload thousands of rosters and is very good. Well, we're going to do a cabin crew version because cabin crew have a lot of physical activity rather than just the mental activity of the pilot. Maintenance engineers work overnight, not quite all the time, but that's where they work, and they're more like shift workers. They have a different workload to others. Business checks are already talked about, and we're collecting data now for the helicopter emergency medical supply. Sitting in a helicopter is really quite a bad experience and has a different workload. That's the components of the model which we've seen. The effective workload really comes down to the number of sectors that you fly, and that's in the model. That's the scale that we use, Samparelli's scale from 1 to 7. The pilot I talked about that had killed 8 people earlier and hit the mountain, he was 6.8 on that scale, so he was pretty well tired. On short-haul operations, these are the things that we've identified as being significant and driving fatigue. And that's the sort of graph that we've created with that. On long-haul operations, it's mainly to do with the time shift and the acclimatization. It's a very complex model, and if you can see this, which is recovery after a 10-hour eastward transition, there you're going east, and some people are getting 10 hours transition, some are 9, some are 7. Someone down here thinks he's gone west. So, and this is how they go back. Some take a long time to go back. Some go back fairly quickly to their time. Individual differences is quite severe. So you've really got to collect an awful lot of information to be able to get something that's statistically robust that can apply to your market. In ultra long haul, we did this on behalf of Singapore Airlines and Airbus back in 2002. Because Singapore wanted to buy the Airbus, but there wasn't any regulatory cover. So we used SAFE to forecast what's likely to happen, and the regulator then agreed our shift patterns, the 2 crew with in-flight rest and 2 sleep opportunities, on the assurance that we would actually measure the actual fatigue for 6 months afterwards. And we did, and we found, in fact, that the projections and the actual had a very, very close correlation. So this was back in 2002, and we've got a fair bit amount of information since then. So all the research studies are here, and you're very welcome to download them and read what we've done. It's all been peer-reviewed, and so it's all good stuff. Now I want to show you finally how we actually use this model. So this is something that my company Alert Air has created. It's one of the few airlines that's not losing money. That's because I invested in it. It hasn't bought any aircraft yet and it hasn't flown anywhere yet. It's the best way of protecting your capital. So we've located it in Johannesburg, and here there's a 4-day Perth trip. The second thing I've done is to take it on to Mumbai for the second pilot. The third pilot, I sent him off to Sao Paulo, and then the fourth pilot, being a nice guy, I said, do everything, and you can only have 1 night's rest in between. So I put it into my model, and that's the amount of data that you need. It's not an awful lot. You know, where you start, when you finish, and where you finish, number of sectors, that's a workload. And then all this is to do with the in-flight rest. You've got to know how many crew are there, which order you're taking your sleep in, what sleep class, that's the quality of sleep. So are you in a bunk? Are you sitting in the flight deck seat, or are you in the business class passenger compartment? Where your home base is, and also what time are we talking about? Is it base time, is it local time, or is it UTC? So you can easily put that into a very simple spreadsheet like that, and suck it in. And I think I've gone up one too many, have I? Yeah. That's what you get when you sign on, which is a nice picture and a whole lot of marketing stuff. It's very good because I wrote it. And here is the first screen that you get to be able to choose the roster that you're interested in. This indicator here means there's something that's not quite right. Just the fatigue has gone above the threshold that you've set. And these are the duties that we've put in. Note that this icon here tells you, in fact, if you're okay or not. If it's above the threshold, the fatigue is above the threshold, then it turns red. And you can see the single flights there, but here's the whole lot put together. And that grey line there, the thicker it is, the more the fatigue is, or the more the highest fatigue limit has actually gone beyond that threshold. And this is the display that you get, which is quite easy to follow, really. You know, that's where you are at Johannesburg. That's your base, and that's midnight, going through 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 18, and midnight again. These grey things are where the program predicts that you sleep. We know how pilots behave. We know how they sleep. We know when they move across time zones, it's quite difficult to sleep. And we also know before they start an overnight, they always have a little nap. And we know how long that nap is, depending on what they've done before. And there you can see the start of the duty, and it goes overnight. Here is the in-flight sleep, and this red bit here is the sleep inertia. As I say, you can see that what he's doing. He's having one night off there, then he's having his sleep again, ready for the next one. He's having the first sleep opportunity there. And down here you can see what the data is. Now, if you go into there, if you put your cursor anywhere on those duties and click, then you're going to get this graph. So all the input data is here, and you can change all that. And where the cursor is, I can't see where the cursor is, it's probably there. Down here, you can see what the fatigue score is. And there's a fatigue score on the 100-point scale, 100-point alertness scale. So the higher that is, the more alert you are. Or on the Sam Pirelli 1 to 7 scale, so the higher that is, then the more fatigued you are. And there's a Sam Pirelli scale there. I think, yes, on here you've got the destination time. So if you click on the destination there, then it'll tell you what the time is there. So you can see the offset, and you can take a good decision on that. And you can change that. You can change these sleeps, make them longer, shorter. If you know what the pilot actually did, rather than the average pilot would have done, then you can put in the actual sleeps there. And if there's an incident, you can put the time of the incident in that clock there, and the cursor will snap back to that exact time. So you can put in, for incident investigation, exactly what the pilot did, what time, and then take a photograph of that for your report. And here you can see if we do all 4 flights, actually it's a bit nasty. It's a Sam Pirelli 5.4. Normally we see pilot fatigue reports coming in around 4.8, 4.9. And so really at 5, we should be actually doing something and trying to manipulate this to make sure that the pilot isn't too fatigued. 5.4 is too high, so we would want to do something about that. So one possible thing to do is to move his sleeps to the second sleep. And already you see you've got a reduction down to 5.1. If you make it the third sleep, it'll go down even further. And it's very likely that the captain will take the last sleep anyway. But of course the better solution is to give the poor guy some time off between flights and be reasonable. So therefore that's going down to 4.6, which actually is perfectly okay. So that's some of the reports that come out. Every 15 minutes you get a fatigue score for all the duties, and you can put in a whole year's worth of duties there. So you get a huge amount of data out. And here is the data that you put in, and also the maximum scores on each. So the lowest alertness and the highest Sam Pirelli fatigue score, and the time at which that occurred. So if you click on that link, then it'll take you back to that display, that duty, that time, and so you can make a decision whether in fact you want to accept that or not. And finally, there's another Excel spreadsheet that tells you how long the pilot was above the threshold that you set, so you can see how fatiguing it is. And again, here there's no instance, but you can sort of click on the link there, and it'll take you back to that thing there. So advantages and limitations of models, really they aren't reality. They are just a conglomeration of a huge amount of experience that gives you an indication of what the hazard could be for the average pilot. As I say, I've yet to meet the average pilot, but that gives you a yardstick that you can then make your judgment as a manager. I don't think that you should be you should be relying on a model for a decision because you're a manager. This is a tool. You don't tell your spanner to go away and fix your car. You use it to go away and fix the car. And this is a very good tool to give you an indication of where there could be a fatigue issue. If your union comes back and says, we're still fatigued, and even though the SAFE model said it was okay, then we've got to start looking at the lifestyle and the kind of person the pilot is. Has he got an issue at home? Has he got a sleep disorder? In one case, I've done a huge analysis that showed that for a whole year, pilots were complaining that they couldn't sleep in the bunk because the company put all the crying babies outside their door. So they were just woken by screaming children all the time. And yet, a year later, the babies were still screaming and the pilots weren't sleeping. So it's not rocket science, you know. So, as I say, they are models, they're not reality, and they don't cater for individual differences, but they give you the first indication of that. You be a bit careful about this because, say, the chap who had this accident with late at night, he sat in front of his insurer and their legal guy, and he's very pleased to say that he'd actually used a model that was validated in the aviation industry. He didn't use one that was validated in the trucking industry. I think otherwise they killed him. So he was able to demonstrate he'd started this program, he'd started to measure, and so they're monitoring him very, very closely. He has one of their people looking after him and monitoring him, but he's going in the right direction, and of course he still has his job. But so models need to be used with care, and user training is essential. We always insist when we get a new customer for our model that we educate them in terms of fatigue science, what they're looking for, and how to use the model, and how to interpret the results. Otherwise you can go wrong. So that's a summary of modeling. Just be a bit careful. So make sure it's the right tool for the job. So for more information on this, you can go to our website. But I started this forum 4 years ago. We just had our 4th annual conference in Brisbane. And it's a very cheap way of networking with the early adopters in FRMS. So everyone gives their time for free. We have a website that's got lots of data on it. It costs £250 to join, and then £100 a year. And for that, you get free entry to all our conferences, you get free access to the data, and that's for your whole organization, not just you. It's not a per individual, it's a per organization. So please visit it and go and have a look. I've just announced a prize that we want to give to a young person to push the science forward in FRMS, so it's worth $1,500. So if anyone of you around is mercenary and under 40, I think it's just too darn late for you, but never mind, there could be someone younger that can come up with something, write a paper. And I've got Philippe Cabon at Paris University to do the scientific assessment, and Chris Trischler from German Wings, who's very advanced in his FRMS, to look at it from an operational perspective. And then next year we'll award the prize and invite them to go and give a presentation at our next forum meeting, which is likely to be in Paris. And I think that's about it. Well, some sort of thoughts there. Yeah, you can probably manage all this yourself. You need to educate people and obviously look at the hazard education, but you can probably manage it all yourself. I mean, Israelis are very well known for their innovation. I think you can actually do it yourself. It's just management after all. But you might need some mentoring. So you might want to find someone with all this information that can help you along the first steps. And say, look for these hidden ones, because there's a lot that is going on that you might not find straight away. And then when you're doing that, look for your productivity gains to get a return on investment. Thank you.